Very welcome, Mr. Tony Wagner, here in Holland and in Amsterdam. We are very, very pleased that you are here at our Making Conference, Making Shift Happen. We want to talk about your main speech you just made, and you were stressing on the fact that we need innovators. Can you tell me a little bit, why do we need innovators?
Well, that's really an important question, because I think many people believe that we still have a knowledge economy, a global knowledge economy. But in fact, knowledge has become a commodity, growing exponentially, changing constantly. It's on every internet-connected device. And who's using all of this knowledge? For the most part today, it is computers that collect, aggregate, analyze, and disseminate knowledge. So they've replaced a lot of the human tasks. So what does that leave us for? What can humans do that is unique? And I argue human beings are by nature innovators. They are creative problem solvers. And the young people today who know how to solve problems creatively are going to be the most sought after, the most in demand in our new workforce.
So in order to create innovators, what does it mean for the role of schools?
Well, that's the really important question. Schools traditionally have existed to transmit knowledge. Now, today you don't need a school, you don't need a teacher to acquire knowledge. Google knows everything. So I argue that while acquiring content knowledge is still important, that's the easy part. More important than content knowledge are skills. The skills to work collaboratively, to solve problems critically, and so on. And even more important than skills are motivation. So if you are intrinsically motivated, you will continuously acquire new content knowledge and new skills. So I believe that every teacher needs to think about content knowledge, skill, and will, meaning motivation, as the three cornerstones of any lesson plan or unit of study.
You talk about a learning gap. Can you explain that? What do you mean by the learning gap? We have a learning gap.
Well, you know, I've spent a great deal of time observing in many traditional schools around the world. And I juxtapose what I see in those schools to what I've learned by interviewing senior executives about the skills that matter most. And that gap is simply stunning. We are trapped, I think, with kind of very old ideas about what schools should look like, what learning should look like, what our classrooms should look like. Meanwhile, out there in the world, you know, I learned from executives, for example, that the most important skill is the ability to ask really good questions, that's essential for problem identification. But are we teaching our kids how to ask questions or make answers for the test?
So how can we close that gap in the schools? What do we have to do?
Well, I think the first challenge is for leaders to make very clear what is the nature of the world for which we must prepare our young people. What do our young people need for work, for learning, and for citizenship? Once we have a new consensus about the skills that matter most, then we can empower our educators to do the kind of research and development that is necessary to develop the new models, and we can develop assessment and accountability systems aligned with those outcomes that matter most.
Okay, so what does it mean for the future of learning and the role of teachers, in your opinion?
Well, the future of learning is simply to understand that while content matters, skills matter more, and motivation matters most. Are we giving students work worth doing? Are we continuing to nurture and stimulate their curiosity and imagination? Are we being good coaches of learning? Because that, ultimately, I believe, is the job of a teacher. It's not merely to acquire and transmit knowledge, but to coach students to a higher performance standard and to be very clear about the competencies or outcomes that our young people must master in order to thrive in this new world.
Great. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you very much for this interview.
My great pleasure. I've had a wonderful time here.
Thank you.